Welcome back to the show. You know I'm a passionate hockey fan, and that comes to 67's Ottawa Senators. Really felt we had a lot to talk about, my next guest and I, leading up to this this Thursday. And then, of course, the news came out, the big press conference yesterday with Michale Andlauer, which was quite refreshing. Steve Staios was there as well. But we're going to break down things for you, not just talk about the Evgenii Dadonov situation, but talk about the Sens in general. I'm joined by Brandon Plant. He is the host of Sens Talk podcast. Welcome. Great to have you here, Brandon.
Thanks so much.
I have followed you for a long time, and you do such a great job. I just wanted to start with that. For those viewers that have heard about everything and what the consequences are, how did this all come to be?
Yeah, so we got to go back to March of 2021, essentially, where it was the trade deadline. The Anaheim Ducks and Vegas Golden Knights were looking to make a trade. This was, of course, with Evgenii Dadonov, like you mentioned. The issue, of course, though, is Ottawa was the original team that dealt Dadonov to Vegas a year prior. Vegas was not aware, accordingly, apparently, they weren't aware that Evgenii Dadonov had a 10-team no-trade list.
Right.
Now, when Vegas called Ottawa, Pierre Dorion, the former general manager, to see whether they would have, he had a no-trade clause or not, Pierre Dorion reportedly said no. Obviously, that's a big no pun intended.
Yeah.
And afterwards, Vegas and Anaheim would end up making the trade. And of course, this is the trade deadline, so there's really no wiggle room.
Right.
Essentially, what happened is the National Hockey League annulled the trade because on that 10-team no-trade list was the Anaheim Ducks. Now, we heard a little bit afterwards that Ottawa was cleared of any wrongdoing. That was about a year ago or so.
Right.
Obviously, obviously things have changed. The Senators were docked a first-round pick due to this situation. And essentially what happened is a player said no, within their right to say no.
Right.
And Vegas was not happy about it. They felt embarrassed about the situation that a player that had to stay on their team at the trade deadline, and it worked out for them. He started to produce,
right,
he did very well.
Yeah.
But they were embarrassed, so they wanted the National Hockey League to pursue a penalty, and of course they did.
And then the announcement yesterday that Pierre Dorion, handed in his resignation. I mean, from your perspective, that resignation is more of, hey, we're letting you do it.
He's really exit.
Yeah, a graceful exit. They didn't have a choice, really, right?
No, in a situation like that where you're losing a first-round pick due to negligence, whether it's on purpose, a mistake, it's a issue where it just can't happen. You just can't have it happen. And there's been other mistakes that the National Hockey League has made, Pierre Dorion has made, where you can argue a fireable offense, but this is absolutely a fireable offense purely because a first-round pick's a top asset. You have a guy like Ridley Gregg, for example, Tim Stützle, Jake Sanderson. These are first-round picks.
Yeah.
And now you're losing the opportunity to select one purely because of a mistake by the GM himself.
I thought it was interesting that Andlauer also said this was the last straw for Pierre Dorion. So he obviously felt that there were some other, as you just mentioned, right? There were some other things that he was not happy with. And this was it. He was like, okay, I haven't been happy with some of the things, but this is the last straw. What about, so where do they go from here?
Yeah.
Is the general manager search underway? Is there any rumored, perhaps, replacements so far?
In the press conference, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, it was very spicy conference there, yes. Very spicy. Look, what we know right now is Steve Staios, the president of hockey operations for the Ottawa Senators, will be the general manager on an interim basis. From everything I've heard from sources and everything we've seen from Steve Staios and Michale Andlauer, this will be a process that should be done before next year.
Okay.
But between now and then, there's going to be a search. They want to take a look at a wide range of candidates, and I would expect, personally, just from what I've heard from sources, that we'll likely see that in the offseason. Things can change, of course, but I think Steve Staios, I'm so used to saying Pierre Dorion.
Yeah, I hear you.
Steve Staios and Michale Andlauer probably want to take their time and get this right. So
for sure.
I think they'll take their time. And Steve Staios, it's fine on an interim basis. The guy built a championship team in the OHL. He knows how to run a team on a day-to-day basis. So there's really no issue with it on an interim basis for sure.
You mentioned that spicy press conference. I found it very refreshing.
Yes.
Just, your thoughts on the way that Andlauer handled himself and the way that he kind of spoke to the NHL too, right?
It's refreshing, like you said.
Yeah.
It's refreshing. It's nice to see an owner truly say it like he sees it. And you have to understand his perspective. He just bought the team a month ago, and there's been 2 massive penalties levied by the National Hockey League within a week span. Of course, Shane Pinto, and now, of course, with the Evgenii Dadonov situation. So when he came out very fiery in that press conference, not many people should be surprised that he was upset. I think most people are surprised of how far he went with what he said, whether it was calling out the National Hockey League for the hypocrisy with gambling, of course, calling out the National Hockey League itself for basically not telling him the severity, especially on the Evgenii Dadonov situation and Shane Pinto, the severity of what these penalties are. Once again, we have to remember he was led to believe, and the other bidders as well, a month and a half, 2 months ago, before he was selected as the preferred bidder, they were told that, especially this Dadonov situation, it was not a big deal.
Yeah, there was no hint of the Pinto situation whatsoever. That wasn't mentioned to them.
And we know that's been going on since the summer as well.
That's right. That's right. So can you see, because of those circumstances, Andlauer going back to the NHL and saying, hey, listen, because of the circumstances which you did not let me know during the negotiation period, is there a chance that they could perhaps look at another consequence that's a little lesser in severity?
I think so. We were speaking about this before the show. I think you're absolutely right on that. Look, the penalty for the Evgenii Dadonov situation is a first-round forfeit loss. But the Senators have the option for 2024, 2025, or 2026 to lose that first-round pick.
Right.
We've seen it in 2014 with the New Jersey Devils when they tried to circumvent the cap by signing Ilya Kovalchuk for 17 years. They gave them a harsh penalty. New ownership came in afterwards, similar to the Ottawa Senators situation with them, and they reduced the penalty. I think that might happen here, especially since we have 3 years until the penalty officially can be levied. So with a new owner, very harsh penalty, and he made his opinion known in that press conference. I think there's a good opportunity that the pick is reduced.
You're going to stick around for another segment because we haven't even talked about hockey yet. So Brandon Plant and I, host of Sens Talk Podcast, will be back after this to break down the season so far and what we can expect moving forward. Welcome back to the show, back to continue our conversation with Brandon Plant, host of Sens Talk Podcast. And let's talk hockey. Let's talk about, the product on the ice, right? Yeah. Started off well, right? 3-1, and then that 3-game losing streak. What do you make of the season so far?
Well, we just spoke about it. November is so important. So right now I'm just looking in the future.
Okay.
Not in the past.
Okay,
look
good.
At the future, right?
All right.
We got some injuries, but any team goes through injuries. You have to face that adversity, and this team showed they can score. They can score in bunches. It's all about the defense and keeping the puck out of the net, which has been the consistent issue of this team over the last few years.
Right.
But what I will say is they got a lot of games coming up at home. Against some tough opponents in the Eastern Conference, teams they'll likely be competing with for those final 1 or 2 wildcard spots.
Okay.
So big month coming up in November. They have to be more than just above 500. They have to exceed that mark, and if they do, I feel very good about their chances in March and April.
You mentioned injuries. Missing 3 of your top 6 defensemen is not easy. And DJ Smith, he's been criticized quite a bit with his defensive structure. I mean, he remains on the hot seat, I would imagine. Like, if this November doesn't go well for this team, DJ Smith, I mean, can he last any longer?
Look, I love DJ Smith as a person.
Yeah, me too.
The character, he's a great guy. He's built the culture around the locker room. You have to commend him for that. But this is a business. And if you don't get the results on the ice, unfortunately, you're going to have to go. So like you just said, big November coming up. I think if the Senators are especially below 500 by the end of November, and they finish November, the games they played in November below 500, he's gone. Once again, there's expectations on this team to make the playoffs. There's no excuses. There's no silver linings. This is a team that needs to push
injuries,
for the playoffs.
Regardless of injuries, because we can use that as an excuse any time, right? This team has had some bad luck. There's no doubt. What do you think of the guys that they brought up to replace these injured players so far?
Well, Tyler Clevin is a top asset for this team. The guy is the Clev bomb, they call him for a reason.
I love him. I absolutely love him.
A freak of nature physically. He's so big, really throws around the hits. Reminds me of Mark Mathot, for example.
Yeah.
Another guy that brought up, Nicholas Manampalo, they signed over from Europe and free agency. This is a guy that is a rookie technically, but not very much so a rookie. I mean,
Like
this
how
guy,
old is he? 26?
24, 25,
okay,
26.
okay.
And this is a guy that's played professionally for a few years now in Europe. A guy that's played for Finland at the IIHF World Championships. This is a very experienced hockey player, and he looked fantastic the other day against Pittsburgh.
Jacob Bernard Docker, I mean, here's a guy that, waved and has been with
What
the
a story.
organization for a long time. Is there any promise that this kid may have a job with the Sens down the road, or is he? I mean, for him, he must be thinking of it in his agent. I've got to showcase myself.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, he was picked a few years ago in the first round, but it's been a few years. He still has that first round pedigree, and you don't want him to get cut for that reason. But at the same time, they put him on waivers, and he snuck through, thankfully.
Yeah.
But they did put him on waivers.
Yeah.
So they clearly are okay with losing him, potentially. They don't see him as a guy in this top six, especially with the emergence of Tyler Clevin, Manon Paulo. It's a difficult spot for JBD, and he's a friend of the show. He's been on my YouTube channel before.
He's a great guy. Yeah, I
Great
agree.
guy.
I agree.
But unfortunately, like I said with DJ Smith, it's a business, and he just hasn't performed at times like a first-round pick. I think he should get an extended look this year, especially with injuries, and he's still a talented hockey player, and there's absolutely a chance he could bounce back.
Jake Sanderson, we want to talk defense. I mean, chef's kiss is exactly a little bit of criticism, maybe even a lot, as far as some people are concerned when he was first drafted. But boy, oh boy, did they hit on this kid, right?
This guy is going to win a few Norrises in his day for sure. He's already a top 10 defenseman in my books. Okay. And I'm a little biased, of course, when I say that, but the way he skates, the transition game, his puck moving abilities, and most importantly, his shot, as you've been watching, clearly has improved. He scored like 3 or 4 goals in the first 6 games.
Yeah.
He's been on a tear. Speaking of tear, Jacob Chychrun has been on a tear as well, this entire blue line.
Yeah.
He scored multiple goals as well. So last year, I spoke about this in my season preview on YouTube, the blue line didn't produce anything.
Agreed.
This year, it's been the complete opposite. So Jake Sanderson, he's really putting the puck in the back of the net. His two-way game is unbelievable. Jacob Chychrun, same thing. Ottawa is just truly blessed with an abundance of elite blue liners.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Ridley Gregg, let's talk about him. Shane Pinto, when he comes back, he's obviously going to get his spot. And I will say about Shane Pinto, just quickly, I appreciate the way the Senators have supported him through this. Michale Andlauer did the same thing yesterday, talking during the press conference. But it's given Ridley Gregg a chance to showcase himself. Again, I think this is another pick that surprised a lot of people at the time. But I mean, another impressive-looking young player for the Sens.
Another top player coming out of North Dakota, just like Tyler Clevin,
that's right. Yeah.
I mean, the guy is very good, and he was thrust into a difficult spot last year when Josh Norris went down with that shoulder injury. He's a rookie playing top 6 minutes against guys like Crosby, Bergeron, Matthews, the list goes on. Really, really tough in that Atlantic division. He put up 20 goals and an above 52-53% faceoff percentage, which is 3-4 points above league average. Doesn't sound like a lot. That's a hell of a lot, though. That's a great amount there. So this is a guy that's very talented, and having him on that third line would truly help this team in the long run for sure. And he will be back. I want to say this, like you said with Michale Andlauer, it's a great change of pace to see how the organization is supporting their player in a tough spot, not calling them out. And Elliot Friedman specifically mentioned the fact that there's no whisper campaign. They didn't try to use this against him to lower his AAV on his next contract. It's truly, and look, Steve Stais, Michale Andlauer, when they brought in Steve Stais, they wanted to be the best in class, and here's an example of that. They're being the best in class. And
I think Shane Pinto's going to appreciate it. I just have like 30 seconds left. Goaltending, how are you feeling?
I've been a big fan of Jonas Korpisalo and Anton Forsberg. I think Forsberg is one of the most underrated goalies in the National Hockey League if you look at his advanced analytics. Most importantly, Korpisalo and Forsberg won a championship before in the AHL. The Calder Trophy with Cleveland Monsters. So they have a winning pedigree, and let's see if they can do it again. People can follow you on X, right? Sens Talk _. Yes, sir. And your YouTube channel, same thing. YouTube.com/Sens Talk. Yeah. Brandon, boy, oh boy. As I said, I thought we had a few things to talk about a couple of weeks ago, but it's been so great. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Again, you can follow him on X, formerly Twitter, at Sens Talk _. YouTube.com/Sens Talk. We'll be back with more right after this. Don't go anywhere.